The desert was silent. No wind, no birds, no sound at all. Ethan had been driving for hours across the empty land. His old vehicle moved slowly over the hot sand. The sun was high, and the air felt heavy. This place was far from cities, far from people. Ethan liked it that way. He came to the desert to be alone. But that day felt different. His vehicle suddenly stopped. The engine died without warning. Ethan tried to start it again, but nothing happened. The screen inside the vehicle flickered and turned black. Even his radio stopped working. "That's strange," he said quietly. He stepped outside. Heat hit his face immediately. The desert stretched endlessly in every direction. For a moment, everything felt normal. Then he saw them. Far away, something tall stood against the horizon. At first, Ethan thought they were broken towers or old machines. But the shapes looked wrong. Too smooth. Too human. Curious, he grabbed his water bottle and started walking toward them. The closer he got, the colder the air felt. That made no sense in the burning desert. A strange feeling crawled up his spine, telling him to turn back. But Ethan kept moving. After 10 minutes of walking, he finally saw clearly. They were not towers. They were women. 5 giant women hung upside down from black metal structures buried deep in the sand. Thick chains wrapped around their arms and legs. Their long hair moved slightly even though there was no wind. Ethan froze. Each woman was at least 30 feet tall. Their skin looked almost human, but faint lines of blue light moved slowly under it, like energy flowing through veins. Strange symbols glowed on the chains holding them. "They can't be real," Ethan whispered. One of them moved. Her fingers twitched slightly. Sand fell from her hand. Ethan's heart started beating faster. He wanted to run, but his legs would not move. Then her eyes opened. They glowed softly, silver and calm. She looked directly at Ethan, and suddenly he heard a voice. "Help us." Ethan looked around quickly. No one was there. The voice came again, clear inside his head. "Please help us." The giant woman's lips did not move, but her eyes stayed locked on him. She looked weak, tired, and in pain. Ethan stepped closer without thinking. The metal structures around them looked old and damaged, half buried in sand. Some cables were broken. It looked like these machines had been abandoned long ago. "Who did this to you?" Ethan said softly. The answer came slowly. "We were left here a long time ago." Ethan hesitated. Something felt wrong. The desert was too quiet. The air felt heavy, like the world itself was watching him. He walked around the structure and saw deep marks in the sand, like something had crashed here many years ago. These women were not prisoners from Earth. That much was clear. The giant's breathing was slow and weak. Her chains were cracked in places, as if time itself had damaged them. Ethan knew he should leave. Call for help. Forget what he saw. But he also saw fear in her eyes. And Ethan had never been good at walking away from someone who needed help. He found a piece of broken metal near the base of the structure. The chain looked old enough to break. He raised the metal bar and paused one last time. "This is probably a bad idea," he muttered. The moment the metal struck the chain, a deep sound echoed through the desert. Not loud, but powerful, like something waking far below the ground. The chain snapped. The giant woman fell slowly into the sand, the ground shaking when she landed. Dust rose into the air around them. For a second, nothing happened. Then the sky flickered. Dark clouds appeared for only a moment before disappearing again. Ethan looked up, confused. The air suddenly felt colder. Behind him, the sand shifted. A low rumble traveled under his feet, moving deeper into the desert. Ethan turned back toward the fallen giant. Her eyes were open now, stronger than before. But she was not looking at him anymore. She was looking at the other 4 giants still hanging above. And one of their chains began to crack on its own. Far beneath the desert, something ancient opened its eyes. The desert stayed quiet, but the silence no longer felt peaceful. Ethan stepped back as the giant woman slowly pushed herself up from the sand. Every movement she made felt heavy, like she had been asleep for years. Sand slid off her skin as she breathed deeply for the first time. The ground trembled again. Ethan looked up at the other 4 giant women still hanging upside down. One of the chains above them made a sharp cracking sound. "Wait," Ethan said nervously. "What's happening?" The giant woman turned her head toward him. Her silver eyes were clearer now, stronger. When she spoke, the voice again appeared inside his mind. "You should not have done that." Ethan swallowed. "You asked for help." She looked away for a moment, almost sad. "Yes, because I was weak." That answer confused him. Before he could speak again, the giant slowly sat down in the sand. Even sitting, she was taller than the metal structures around her. She placed one hand on the ground as if trying to steady herself. "My name is Lyra," the voice said calmly. Ethan nodded slowly. "I'm Etan." For a few seconds, neither of them spoke. The air felt colder than before. Small lines of blue light moved across Lyra's skin, brighter now. Then Ethan heard another crack. Both of them looked up. One of the chains holding another giant had split open slightly. The glowing symbols on it flickered like a dying light. Lyra's expression changed. Fear appeared in her eyes. "The seal is breaking." "The seal?" Ethan asked. Lyra closed her eyes for a moment, as if choosing her words carefully. "We were not prisoners. We were contained." Ethan frowned. "Contained from what?" She looked directly at him. "From ourselves." The words made Ethan's stomach tighten. Lyra explained slowly. "Long ago, her people fought a war across many worlds. They were powerful, stronger than most species. But their power came with a danger. When their emotions grew too strong, their energy became unstable. Entire cities were destroyed by accident. Some of her kind lost control completely. To stop the destruction, another alien race created the seals. The 5 giants were placed here, far from other worlds, where their power could sleep. Ethan felt cold despite the desert heat. "So freeing you is bad?" Lyra did not answer immediately. "You weaken the system that holds the others." As if responding to her words, the sand around them vibrated again. A low humming sound filled the air. Ethan noticed small lights moving high in the sky. At first, he thought they were stars, but it was still daytime. The lights moved fast. Lyra looked up sharply. "They found us." "Who?" Ethan asked. Before she could answer, a shadow passed over the desert. Something mechanical flew high above the clouds. It made no sound, but its presence felt heavy. Lyra's voice became tense. "The hunters. The ones who sealed us." Ethan's heart started racing. "They're coming here." "Yes." Another loud crack echoed behind them. One of the hanging giants suddenly moved. Her head lifted slightly, her long hair falling toward the sand. The glowing symbols on her chains faded quickly. Ethan stepped back. "Can you stop it?" Lyra shook her head slowly. "The system is damaged. Once one seal breaks, the others weaken." The second giant's eyes opened. Unlike Lyra's calm, silver eyes, these glowed bright blue. Her lips slowly formed a smile, but there was no warmth in it. The air around her shimmered. Sand lifted slightly off the ground, floating for a moment before falling again. Ethan felt pressure in his chest, like the air itself was getting heavier. Lyra stood up quickly despite her weakness. "This is bad. She is waking too fast." The second giant's chain snapped without anyone touching it. She dropped into the sand with a powerful impact that sent dust into the air. For a moment, everything went still again. Then the newly freed giant laughed softly. The sound echoed across the empty desert, cold and unfamiliar. Ethan realized something terrible. Not all of them were afraid of being free. Above them, the strange lights in the sky grew larger as ships began descending through the clouds. Lyra looked at Ethan, fear clear in her eyes now. "You wanted to help us," she said quietly. She turned toward the awakening giant behind her. But now, it may already be too late. The sky changed first. The blue color faded as dark shadows moved across the desert. Ethan looked up and saw large shapes breaking through the clouds. Silent ships floated high above, smooth and silver, without wings or engines. They did not look friendly. A cold wind began to move across the sand. The air felt heavy, like a storm was coming, but there were no clouds. The second giant woman stood slowly after falling from the chains. She stretched her arms, as if waking from a long sleep. Sand lifted around her feet, floating for a moment before dropping again. She smiled. Ethan felt uneasy. Her eyes were bright blue, glowing stronger than Lyra's. Lyra stepped in front of Ethan protectively. "Do not speak to her," Lyra warned inside his mind. "She is not stable yet." Above them, one of the ships moved lower. A beam of white light scanned the desert, passing over the metal structures and the remaining giants still hanging upside down. A voice suddenly filled the air, not inside Ethan's head this time, but everywhere around them. "Unidentified human. Step away from the sealed entities. This area is under control." The voice sounded calm but cold, like a machine. Ethan looked around nervously. "Who are you?" The voice answered immediately. "We are the Wardens. Those beings must not be released." Lyra's expression hardened. Anger flashed across her face for the first time. "They call themselves protectors," she said quietly to Ethan. "But they fear us." The ship lowered further, and smaller drones flew out from its sides. They circled above like watching eyes. The voice spoke again. "The giants you see destroyed entire civilizations during the war cycle. The seals were placed to prevent further loss of life." Ethan looked at Lyra, confused. "Is that true?" Lyra hesitated. "We lost control," she admitted. "But we were not monsters." Before Ethan could respond, the second giant laughed again. She looked up at the ships with excitement instead of fear. "So they finally came back," she said aloud. Her voice was deep and powerful, shaking the air itself. The drones moved closer instantly. "Entity 2 has awakened," the voice announced. "Prepare containment." Energy weapons appeared beneath the ships, glowing with blue light. Ethan's heart pounded. "They're going to attack." Lyra grabbed his attention. "Listen carefully," she said urgently. "Our power reacts to danger. The more they threaten us, the stronger we become." As if proving her words, the air around the second giant began to distort. Heat waves moved through the desert. The sand under her feet slowly turned into smooth glass. Ethan stared in shock. "This isn't normal." The second giant raised her hand toward the sky. The drones suddenly stopped moving, frozen in the air like invisible hands were holding them. The ships reacted immediately. Bright beams of energy shot downward, striking the ground around her. The explosion threw sand everywhere. Ethan fell to his knees, covering his head. The sound was deafening. When the dust cleared, the giant was still standing. Not a single mark on her. She smiled wider. Lyra looked terrified now. "She is waking too fast," Lyra whispered. "Her memories are returning." The ground shook violently. Cracks spread through the desert floor. Far away, dunes collapsed as if something massive moved beneath them. The voice from the ship changed tone, losing its calm. "All units engage. Full suppression authorized." More ships appeared above the clouds. Ethan realized he was standing between two powerful forces, the hunters in the sky and the giants on the ground. Neither side looked safe. The remaining three giants still hanging above began to move slowly. Their chains glowed weakly, struggling to hold. Lyra turned toward Ethan. "If all five awaken like this planet will not survive." A sudden burst of light exploded behind them. Ethan turned just in time to see the second giant lift both arms toward the sky. The air cracked like breaking glass. A wave of energy spread outward, forcing the ships higher. The sky itself seemed to tear for a moment. Silence followed. Then one of the remaining chains snapped loudly. Another giant's eyes opened, and this time the desert itself began to rise. The desert was no longer calm. Sand rose into the air like waves frozen in time. The ground shook again and again, making it hard for Ethan to stand. Above him, the alien ships moved carefully, keeping their distance now. They were no longer hunting. They were afraid. The newly awakened giant slowly lifted her head. Her eyes glowed purple, brighter than the others. The broken chain fell from her arm and disappeared under the sand. Three giants were now free, and their power was growing. Lyra stood still, trying to stay calm, but Ethan could see fear in her face. The blue light under her skin pulsed faster, reacting to the chaos around them. "This is getting worse." Ethan said, struggling to keep his balance. Yes, Lyra answered inside his mind. Their memories are returning. The war, the fear, the anger. Behind her, the second giant laughed again, enjoying the destruction around her. Every step she took caused the sand to crack and sink. The air shimmered with heat and energy. Above them, one of the ships spoke again, louder this time. Human, leave the area immediately. Final containment will begin. Ethan looked up. Several ships were now forming a circle in the sky. Large weapons appeared beneath them, glowing brighter than before. They're going to destroy everything, Ethan said. Lyra nodded slowly. They believe it is the only way. Another shockwave moved across the desert. The third giant raised her hand without thinking, and gravity itself seemed to twist. A nearby drone crushed inward like paper and fell to the ground. Ethan realized something terrible. The giants were not trying to fight. Their power was reacting on its own. Fear made them stronger. Danger made them unstable. Lyra suddenly grabbed her head, breathing heavily. I remember now, she whispered. This is how it started before. Ethan stepped closer. Then stop it. Tell them to stop. I am trying, she said, pain in her voice. But the others cannot hear me clearly yet. A deep rumble echoed under the desert again. Large cracks opened in the ground, spreading outward like spiderwebs. Hot air rushed out from below, carrying a strange glowing dust. The strongest presence appeared behind them. The fourth giant's chains broke completely. She did not fall. She floated slowly down, her eyes closed, surrounded by soft golden light. The moment her feet touched the ground, the shaking became stronger. Even the ships moved back. Ethan felt pressure pushing against his chest, making it hard to breathe. Lyra looked at the fourth giant with fear. She was the strongest among us. The golden-eyed giant opened her eyes. The sky darkened instantly. Clouds formed from nowhere, spinning slowly above the desert. Lightning flashed silently inside them. The alien ships reacted at once. All units, prepare final purge. Bright energy gathered under the ships. Ethan understood what that meant. They were going to erase the entire area. Everyone included. No, Ethan shouted, but his voice felt small against the storm. Lyra turned to him quickly. There may still be a way. She pointed toward the broken metal structures half buried in the sand. Those machines, they control the seal. If reactivated, they can slow us down. Maybe even stop the energy. Ethan stared at the machines. Sparks still moved inside them. Some parts were destroyed, but others looked active. You want me to seal you again? He asked quietly. Lyra hesitated. Pain crossed her face. If we lose control, yes. Ethan ran toward the structure while the ground continued shaking. Sand hit his face as the storm above grew stronger. He climbed over broken metal and found a glowing panel still working. Strange symbols flashed across it. He did not understand them, but one symbol pulsed brighter than the others. Behind him, the giants' voices grew louder, echoing across the desert. Energy waves rolled through the air. The golden-eyed giant lifted her hand. The desert began collapsing inward, sand sliding toward a growing center like everything was being pulled down. Ethan looked back at Lyra. She was struggling to stay calm, fighting against the power rising inside her. If he activated the machine, they might be trapped forever again. If he didn't, the hunters would destroy them all. His hand hovered over the glowing control. At that moment, the strongest giant finally spoke. Her voice was calm, but powerful enough to silence the storm. Human, she said, looking directly at Ethan. Do you trust us, or do you fear us? The desert continued sinking beneath their feet as Ethan realized his choice would decide everything. The desert was breaking apart. Sand slid toward the center like water going down a drain. The sky above spun with dark clouds and silent lightning. Alien ships circled from a distance, their weapons glowing brighter every second. Ethan stood in front of the broken control panel. His hand hovered over the glowing symbol. One touch could reactivate the seal. One touch could trap the giants forever again. Behind him, the golden-eyed giant watched calmly. The other giants stood around her, their power rising without control. The air vibrated with energy. Even breathing felt difficult. Human, the golden giant repeated softly. Do you trust us, or do you fear us? Ethan's heart pounded. Everything around him told him to be afraid. The shaking ground, the storm, the ships preparing to fire. But he also remembered something else. When Lyra first opened her eyes, she had not looked angry. She had looked scared. Ethan slowly lowered his hand away from the control. I don't think you're monsters, he said, his voice shaking but clear. I think you're afraid. For a moment, nothing happened. The storm continued above them. The ships charged their weapons. A loud warning echoed across the desert. Final purge in 10 seconds. Lyra looked at Ethan, surprised. Why would you risk your life for us? She asked inside his mind. Ethan took a slow breath. Because someone trusted me once when I made mistakes. The word seemed simple, but something changed. The golden-eyed giant closed her eyes. The energy around her slowed slightly. The wind weakened. The second giant, the one who laughed before, looked confused now. Her smile faded as she looked at her own hands, glowing with unstable power. We lost control before, she said quietly. Lyra stepped forward. Yes, she answered gently. But we do not have to repeat the past. Above them, the alien ships began counting down. 5, 4. Energy gathered into a massive beam of light. The desert turned white under its glow. Ethan stepped forward between the giants and the sky. Stop fighting, he said loudly. All of you. The giants looked at him. The hunters above paused for a moment, scanning the scene. Ethan continued, his voice steady now. You're strong. All of you. But strength doesn't mean destroying everything. You can choose something different. For a long second, the only sound was the wind. Then Lyra placed her hand on the ground. Her glowing energy began to flow upward instead of outward. The golden-eyed giant followed her. Slowly, the others did the same. Their power rose into the sky like light instead of spreading through the desert. The storm above started to break apart. The sand stopped sinking. The massive energy beam from the ships faded as their systems detected the change. Energy levels stabilizing, the mechanical voice announced. Hostile activity decreasing. The light from the giants grew brighter, then softer like a sunrise. The pressure in the air disappeared. The desert became still again. Minutes passed. Finally, the last of the energy faded into the sky, leaving silence behind. The giants stood calmly now, their eyes clear. The dangerous glow was gone. The alien ships slowly moved closer, but they did not fire. Lyra turned to Ethan. You changed the outcome, she said softly. Not with power, but with trust. The golden-eyed giant nodded. We were sealed because no one believed we could change, she said. You did. A soft light surrounded the 5 giants. Their bodies began to rise slowly from the ground. We cannot stay here, Lyra said. Our presence will always attract conflict. Ethan watched silently as they lifted higher into the air. Was freeing you really a mistake, he asked. Lyra smiled gently. No, she answered. It gave us a second chance. The light carried them upward until they disappeared beyond the clouds. The alien ships followed, but this time as watchers, not hunters. The desert became quiet again. Days later, Ethan's vehicle started working without explanation. When he finally left the desert, no one believed his story. Years passed, but sometimes at night, strange lights appeared far above the same desert. Ethan would look up and wonder, did they return to visit him? Or were they watching Earth, making sure humanity never made the same mistake again?